And well, today we have the first builders of Arbitrum with us, and they are going to share the full story about it. We have the pioneers of off-chain labs. We have Ed Felten, co-founder and chief research scientist, Stephen Goldfeather, co-founder and CEO, and as well Harry Kalodner, co-founder and chief technology officer, and for sure Masa integration engineer. Everyone from Off-Chain Labs. And as mentioned before, they are the first builders of Arbitrum, and they will share how they are still building for the ecosystem today.
Hi guys, and hi everyone. Welcome to the second panel of the day. We have the founders of the Off-Chain Labs that were already introduced. And these three founders, they have been scaling Ethereum for years. And that's why what I'm going to do today is I want to ask you guys about what does it mean to scale Ethereum at all, and how has been the process evolving over the years. And we all know that Off-Chain Labs has been dropping a lot of new cool technologies and products recently. So I want to talk to you about those technologies. I want to know where we are at, where are we going, what's next in terms of the evolution of infrastructure and technology. And yeah, so I want to know all about these. And without any further words, my first question would be for Stephen. So Stephen, I'm pretty sure most of the audience here, they know what optimistic rollups are, but just to be sure we are all on the same page, can you take a little bit of time and talk about scaling solutions and the history of scaling solutions since 2016, please?
Small question. It's pretty short.
Well, I'll cheat a little bit. I'll go a little before 2016. As Anna mentioned in her intro, if you look back, and that was a fall 2014 semester that Anna was referencing. I think the video was a January 2015 on YouTube and this was Ed and some undergraduates in a seminar class that were build out an initial prototype of Arbitrum. And it was actually Ed's idea went back before that class, but this was the first time where I think a few people worked on it and tried to put it together. And that's actually probably, among the very first attempts at scaling solutions for smart contracts, because there actually was no smart contract platform live yet, right? Ethereum went live. I mean, it was talked about, and there was a paper out, but Ethereum went live later that year, the following year in July of 2015. So it's very much Arbitrum was a in development of sorts before there was a scaling platform. In an academic sense, we understood, okay, there is this really cool technology called smart contracts. If it takes off, and we think it likely will, there's not going to be enough supply for the demand that will be for this technology. How do we scale it? And how do we do that at a point where there's high security, good throughput, and also good usability? So that was definitely among the first. But to shout out some others also early in that era were projects like TrueBit, which were a slightly different, had a different goal. Back then, this wasn't a stateful system. So what I mean by stateful is optimistic rollups and all rollups today, it's kind of a blockchain in and of itself. The model of systems like TrueBit was, all right, we have Ethereum. We're going to reach out to someone to give us do some hard, heavy computation for us, give us some stateless answer, and then we'll take that back into our smart contract. And then I would say, it's interesting because our history is basically of the such that we have been working on Arbitrum and thinking about it for many years, but the community definitely didn't initially see that as a scaling solution of choice. And there was definitely a few years in which the community was betting on two other scaling solutions. One was Plasma, and actually we'll talk about that in a second, but Vitalik maybe gave some new life to Plasma this week in a blog post that he wrote, and we can discuss that. And also another one was state channels. And this was the idea of multiple participants can participate in a channel and do some arbitrary computation there. The problem with Plasma was that, and I think this is still one of the issues that it would have today, is it was actually two problems. Number one, it didn't really work very well for smart contracts. It was much more clear how it worked for payments. And also it had some, it was a little more aggressive in what it tried to achieve. So it tried to not only take computation off chain, but also take data off chain. And then that turned out to have all sorts of issues. And then rollups were actually, in some sense, a simplification. We said, okay, let's try for something a little less ambitious. Let's actually try just to scale computation and leave the data on chain. And it turns out that you can still do a lot and gain a lot. But now today, as rollups have gained in popularity, people are saying, all right, can we somehow get that data bit back and take the data off Ethereum? That's why we see lots of innovation in the data layer. So we see, for example, from Off-Chain Labs in the Arbitrum ecosystem, Arbitrum AnyTrust, which is the technology that Arbitrum Nova launches on, that doesn't have data on Ethereum, but still does settlement on Ethereum and has a really, really high security. And then you also have solutions like other data availability layers, like Celestia, for example, that are taking data off Ethereum that people are innovating with today. And actually, just as I mentioned earlier this week, Vitalik mentioned, hey, is there something we can do, to like resurface Plasma in some way? Personally, I still think that its limitations for smart contracts haven't gone away. So to the extent that that's useful, and it may be useful, it would be more for payments than for smart contracts, but definitely interesting thread of research that many have written off for dead, that some are resparking now. And then just to round things out, so we mentioned people then said, okay, so let's be a little less ambitious and try to put their data on chain. And we call this rollups. And Arbitrum was, when we first developed Arbitrum, and if you look at the initial Arbitrum paper, the word rollup wasn't there. At that time, all it meant was this delicious candy, but it wasn't actually meaningful in our context. But in rollups, there are primarily two directions. There are ZK rollups and there are optimistic rollups. And this depends, and I'm not going to go too much into the detail, but this is all rollups do the same thing in some sense, which is they take computation off chain, they put the result on chain and prove the correctness of the result. How they prove, that's where different rollups differ. Optimistic rollups usually call it fraud proof. In our case, an interactive fraud proof, and ZK rollups use what's called the validity proof. But I'll hold it there for now. But to answer your, the broad question, that's where scaling is today. Rollups are basically seen as the scaling solution, and Arbitrum and optimistic rollups, in my opinion, very strongly are the most mature and most secure and tested solution and most flexible solution. We'll get into, as you mentioned, Arbitrum Stylus and all the other things you can do on the Arbitrum Nitro platform. And I'm super, super excited for both where Arbitrum is today and the scaling that it's enabling, but also the possibilities that it opens up for the future in trying new features and scaling them and increasing bandwidth and throughput while keeping fees low and security high.
Amazing. Yeah, it's always really interesting that you thought about this scalability issue almost around the same time that Ethereum was introduced. So yeah, thanks, Stephen. So we touched on Orbit chains a little bit during the previous panel. Harry, I wanted to ask you to talk a bit more about Orbit chains. What are they and how do they fit into the future cross-chain world?
Yeah, absolutely. So Orbit chains are a permissionless solution for anybody to launch their own Arbitrum chain. So anybody today, without talking to anyone, can go ahead, take the Arbitrum code base and deploy their own L3 chain, which is really cool. It's something that we're certainly working on continuing to make easier. In that launching your own chain can certainly be complex, and I think over the course of the next year, it's going to become increasingly easier and easier. And we saw an awesome panel just before now with two of the teams that are doing a lot to make that happen. But fundamentally, kind of it's an interesting transition that the whole ecosystem is in, where kind of first there was just Ethereum and there were no really heavily adopted scaling solutions. Then we had kind of tech stacks develop that were kind of powering sort of single major chains that were kind of built on that tech stack, or kind of in some cases, I mean, with Arbitrum, we have Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova in kind of slightly different configurations, but without sort of this idea of kind of mass proliferation of kind of many chains that are kind of customized and unique and kind of specific purposes and differentiated. And we're kind of now entering this phase where I think kind of like the maturity of the technology got to the point where and the maturity of the ecosystem got to the point where this kind of Cambrian explosion of sort of chains and customizations and kind of has really started emerging in an exciting way, and kind of both sort of on the level of kind of, well, and we heard also in the last panel about kind of like, well, people are actually modifying the core state transition function. So they're changing the rules of the chain, which is something that kind of, and it's interesting, both the talk by Vitalik earlier and the talks and the last panel both talked about customizing state transition functions and editing kind of the core functionality of how chains work. And so that's kind of certainly one huge area of excitement. And then kind of there's the other huge area of excitement, and I think we're going to be hearing maybe a little more about this later, which is kind of, and Stephen alluded to, which is sort of the ability to customize and modularize the stack and kind of substitute in data availability solutions and potentially substitute in other types of mechanisms, different sequencing mechanisms potentially, but really kind of the fact that once you have this permissionless code base that's kind of optimized for people to mess with it in cool and interesting ways, you have kind of no longer, you kind of have like, well, there's one company that's building it. Instead, you have, and for example, a really cool work done by Celestia to fork the Arbitrum Nitro code base and modify it to add support for Celestia. And I expect that we'll be seeing more and more of this as it comes now. And just to kind of like wrap up with this, so I don't talk too long, the kind of last thing that will be really interesting to see is like what all of this actually means on a practical level for the ecosystem. In that, like, I can kind of paint a story of like, well, you know, tens of thousands of chains, and someday that might actually come to be. But right now, I think kind of people who use multiple chains day to day would say that using a few is already bad enough. It's not exactly easy to manage the complexity that comes from that. And so I think that kind of the path to actually kind of seeing this future of a lot of chains, which I think we will reach, and I think that is kind of required for the level of adoption that we all hope to see in this space, is definitely one that will have to be kind of not just any one kind of technical solution, but kind of the entire ecosystem consolidating around this kind of shared goal of improving technology, improving the UX, improving the DevX, to actually kind of make all of this scaling viable, which should be really cool to see.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks. So at Offchains, we're not only scaling Ethereum, but we also think about scaling smart contracts, having a better runtime execution, and that's involving Stylus, our new product. So I want you to talk about Stylus, Arbitrum Stylus. What is it, and what does it unlock for developers?
Yeah, so Arbitrum Stylus is really probably the project I'm most excited about in the Arbitrum ecosystem today. And it asks the following question, which is, EVM is wonderful, and the Arbitrum Nitro stack has the best possible EVM support, both on the surface and underneath the hood as well. But can we go further than that? Can we make affordances to add more developers and make it easier for them to develop on Arbitrum and by extension on Ethereum? And actually, for those of you that were here earlier for Vitalik's talk, I think it's very appropriate to talk about Stylus. And Vitalik was talking about EVM improvements that basically can be started in L2, but ultimately potentially brought to layer 1 as well. And if you think about this way, Arbitrum Stylus is a wonderful example of something that we're making L2 even better than the layer 1 experience. And, potentially, and my hope is that, this has a chance of even getting back to Ethereum layer 1 if it's successful. And I think that that's a wonderful vision for this. But to tell you what Stylus is, the question is, so we know that EVM or Ethereum Virtual Machine Arbitrum will support and always does support, but is that the ceiling or the floor? And in our view, this is the floor. There's a lot more that we can do, right? There's no reason to say, okay, let's just stop at EVM and we're done. It's like, okay, we've scaled the Ethereum core experience today, the EVM experience, but can we do even more? And by the way, the even more that we do will still be secured by Ethereum. So what is that even more? Stylus allows you to write programs in other languages, right? Smart contracts in other languages. So not just Solidity or other EVM languages, but also Rust, C, and C++ to start, and actually many more potentially in the future that can be targeted to WASM. And the reason why this is important is three. Number one, there are estimated to be a few tens of thousands of Solidity developers out there, 3 million or so Rust developers, 12 million C++ developers. And if you just like zoom out and think about the developers and the companies and enterprise and ecosystems that we could tap into and make it easier to build on Arbitrum and Ethereum, there's just so much possibility out there. And the core thesis is let's try to build our tech to them rather than asking all these millions of developers to learn a new language and learn a new environment. And if we can do that, like we will hyperscale what we can do and who's building with us. Number two is not only the people, but also the code that they've written. There is years and years and years of open source development in these other languages that predates Ethereum and its languages. And if we can just gain access to that, you can just write a smart contract and use an off-the-shelf cryptographic library or an AI library. It's massive and not only makes your job easier, but also just unlocks possibilities. Things that aren't written for EVM today can just be accessed immediately. And then the third thing, which is related to that, is performance. It turns out that stylus performance is 1 to 2 orders of magnitude, so 10 to 100x lower when it comes to computational costs. So even if you could take those advanced cryptographic libraries and write them in the EVM, it turns out they might just not be performant enough to run on chain, but stylus gives you both the ability to easily port to code and it gives you the capacity to run a lot more of it. So for those 3 reasons, I'm super, super excited about stylus, and I think it will massively increase both the number of people who can develop, the number of companies that can develop, the amount of code that we can use, and ultimately the applications that are possible on Arbitrum and on Ethereum. And I think this is a wonderful example, and there are many more that our research team is working on as well, but a wonderful example of how layer 2 is going to push the envelope and bring the entire ecosystem forward and innovate in ways that we can then generalize and bring back and really make improvements that are accessible to the entire Ethereum community, even past Arbitrum.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that too. So the next question would be for Ed. Ed, can you talk a little bit about Bold? What is it and why is it important to decentralize and like open user participation at a protocol level, decentralize the validation?
Yeah, Bold is the next generation fraud-proof protocol or challenge protocol for Arbitrum. And it's the 3rd generation protocol in this area. Fraud proofs are the core security technology for an optimistic rollup. And Arbitrum is unique in being the only optimistic rollup that has working fraud proofs. And in fact, every version of Arbitrum, every mainnet, every testnet has had fraud proofs all the way back even to that student version in 2014. So, you know, Bold is the 3rd generation of fraud proofs for Arbitrum. I mean, right, 3rd generation, that sounds cool. Let me talk about how this actually cashes out for end users. The thing that is unique about Bold is that it makes it safe for the validator role in the protocol to be permissionless. Validators are the parties who have the power to force a correct outcome. And once Bold is out there, Arbitrum will have this, I think, mind-blowing property that any ordinary user of Arbitrum with an ordinary computer can force the chain to execute correctly, even if everyone else is against them within the protocol. And so that permissionless validation means literally that promise that like any one end user can force correct outcome. That means that aspect of the protocol is fully trustless. And that's huge, right? That is a big step on, it's probably the largest remaining step in the decentralization roadmap for Arbitrum. So we're really excited about Bold and that it's there, that it's in the pipeline toward, you know, the code has been published, a security audit has been done, and it's in the pipeline to the point where it will be available to the Arbitrum DAO to decide to deploy on Arbitrum 1, and of course available to Orbit chains.
Amazing, thank you. So speaking of Arbitrum DAO, it's been almost 6 months that Arbitrum DAO was launched, and I personally believe it's been an incredibly engaging 6 months. So Harry, what do you think about the activities for the past 6 months, and how do you think Arbitrum DAO is different from other DAOs?
So I think it's actually been 8 months. Which I just mentioned because it's wild how time flies. Because it feels like no, it's been really cool to see. I mean, it's I think that the Arbitrum DAO is about the most engaged DAO that I've ever seen. And I think this is, you know, probably in some ways played to its benefit, in some ways played to its detriment in others. But I think it's a huge win for kind of the Arbitrum community and the blockchain community as a whole, and kind of to the concept of DAOs, that you can have kind of such a large, active, engaged base of kind of members of who are kind of actively kind of, you know, really strongly caring about what's happening and closely watching what's going on. I mean, I think that the entire STIP process that happened not too long ago, and which is kind of still actively, I mean, now playing out and continuing, was sort of really incredible to see. I don't quite know how the DAO managed even, and I know there were some extremely hardworking delegates reviewing many proposals with incredible levels of detail. And I was grateful to not be that actively participating in that, other than just lurking on the forum occasionally and being able to see what other people were talking about. But it's been really interesting to see. I mean, I think kind of I'll certainly be, and it's very interesting. So far, the DAO has mostly kind of dealt with kind of relatively sort of economic issues, and one of the huge responsibilities of the DAO is kind of dealing with kind of the DAO treasury and allocation of funds, which is kind of incredibly important. But it's going to be really interesting to see, and I think in the coming months and year, there's going to be kind of a lot more in the way of sort of technical proposals in front of the DAO, which is going to be really interesting and kind of, to me, intuitively, probably even more difficult to kind of really actively consider and debate, just because of kind of technical intricacies. And so kind of it's going to be a really sort of exciting experience to see that happen. Since, I mean, the core property of Arbitrum, and again, I certainly would describe this as for good and for bad, but clearly net very, very good, is that the DAO controls the chain, and nothing happens to the chain without going through the DAO. And so there are no technical upgrades to Arbitrum that are not thoroughly endorsed by the DAO and by or in the case of an emergency upgrade, by the Security Council. And so it's kind of seeing that level of just, and it's kind of really just incredible to watch, given that obviously for the first kind of significant period of time, Arbitrum 1 was a chain that was kind of primarily developed and controlled through off-chain labs. And so like a year ago, if we had an ARB-OS upgrade developed, it was a relatively simple process to get it deployed, in that there was no token, there was no DAO, there was no major kind of stakeholder ownership of the chain. And I'm really happy we're not in that phase anymore. I think it was kind of very critical for the early development of the chain, but it was also an incredibly large amount of responsibility over this kind of major public utility. And I've been very, very happy that the DAO is now shouldering that responsibility, and that off-chain is able to kind of be a major contributor to the ecosystem and be a major developer of the technology, but to no longer kind of have this sort of responsibility that no kind of single entity should really hold on its own.
No, of course, the power of decentralization.
It's not just a meme, it's real.
I know. All right, thank you, Harry. Ed, I know you're working very closely with the research team and you're always really active. So is there anything that you guys are doing research on that would impact the Arbitrum ecosystem?
Sure. I mean, there's a ton of amazing research going on in this community. I try to stay on top of all the things that are happening. And let me tell you a few things I'm really excited about now that I think are going to have a big impact on the Arbitrum world going forward. The first one is Time Boost, which is a way of doing transaction ordering that preserves the things that people really love about Arbitrum sequencing. In particular, the very fast response time and short block time, the fact that it protects you against front running and sandwiching and other forms of really harmful so-called MEV. So you can keep all of that, but you can also allow an Arbitrum technology chain to internalize some of the value of MEV, of the benign forms of MEV, like arbitrage or and so on. So that's been in development. It's pretty far along in the kind of research pipeline, getting ready to go. So I think that's one. I'm interested in work that is going on around providing stronger anti-censorship properties, including the ability to shorten the challenge time in the protocol. The famous 7-day challenge time, which on the one hand, that 7-day time has almost no effect on user experience. Still, it would be nice to be able to shorten it, and there's a lot of interesting work going on about how to do that. Really interested in the uses of advanced cryptography to try to make the protocol more efficient. Use of advanced cryptographic methods, use of ZK type technology within the protocol. And then there's of course the open question of, is ZK eventually going to get to the point where it could be the main proof mechanism for the protocol? And really interested to see people exploring those questions. And then finally, there's a ton of work around further scaling methods like sharding, or sort of more acceleration technologies like what you get with Stylus, as well as cross-chain functionalities. There's just a huge amount of work going on. It's an open frontier. I'm really excited to be working on one of the teams that is pushing that agenda forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. At off-chain, we never stop scaling, right? So
never stop. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have only 1 minute left. I just want to know, is there anything happening in the Arbitrum ecosystem that you guys are all really excited about?
Is there anything happening that we're not excited about?
Okay.
I touched on a lot of them today. If I had to sum everything up in a word, it would be basically decentralization. That's true, for the DAO that we discussed. It's true for this technology we discussed, particularly Bold, but also everything else that we do, like Stylus, which will increase the developers that can build and do it in a decentralized manner. So, I think really Arbitrum is both from a technology perspective, from a community perspective, from a DAO perspective, from a governance perspective, an experiment in decentralization, and an extreme experiment in such. And I think it's super exciting to see, and I'm very happy to be a part of all those different streams that lead to a decentralized protocol that's developed and owned by the community.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure talking to you, like always. And I hope the audience has enjoyed it as well. And I give the floor back to Anna. If you have any closing remarks, guys.
No, thanks a lot, Messa.
No, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. To be honest, it's incredible to see how everything started like in a classroom, and now Arbitrum is the most decentralized layer 2 and advanced, with a huge and amazing community and a very impressive DAO, so active and engaged, and as well like many talented people there. So yeah, like as you mentioned, the Arbitrum DAO now has the power and control of Arbitrum. And it's beautiful to see this collaboration between the Arbitrum Foundation, the community in general, all the projects. So yeah, at the end, for a better Arbitrum, a better present, and a better future. So thank you so much for joining us today.